The simple concept of the Mega Man series seemed like it would be perfect for the simple Nintendo Game Boy. None of the games are especially long in the first place, so a side series should have been perfect for the Star handheld device. Dr. Wily's Revenge, released in Japan as Rockman World, features robot masters from the very first Mega Man game without being a recreation. The stage designs are all brand new, so we have a lot to evaluate. Okay, I lied, it's a Game Boy game, so it isn't really a lot. In fact, the roster of 6 Robot Masters from the original Mega Man has been cut to 4. The survivors are Cutman, Electman, Iceman, and Fireman, which I think is the best group to choose. No offense to Gutsman and Bombman, their stages were only loosely related to their abilities in the first place. We have to start somewhere, and I started with Electman's stage. There was no real reason behind it, although it did determine my stage order as a whole since I'm familiar with the series. This was perhaps not the best level to test out Mega Man's controls, however. It seems that his perfectly tuned controls from the NES were unsuccessfully translated to a new device. Now he's weirdly floaty, and at times it feels inconsistent. Also, before I talk about the new stage designs, I have a lot of questions about the sound design. I'm sure it was hard to work with the Game Boy audio capabilities, but many other developers were more successful in using it. I'm disappointed that Capcom's first attempt at making Game Boy Mega Man music resorted to using shortcuts. The 4 Robot Master stages bring back their respective tunes with often simplified rhythms. The worst part of the sound, though, is a single sound effect. When Mega Man lands from a jump, the same 2 pitched notes play every time. Because of track limitations, one part of the music has to stop playing to let this sound effect play. We see this a lot with sound effects in retro games, but it's particularly bad here because of how often you jump. If you haven't played this game, just imagine constantly hearing these 2 notes clash with the key of the background music. I can't wrap my head around why they used an entirely different sound than the series already had. Opening rant aside, let's talk about what you're actually here for. The stage designs, while confined to a much smaller screen, are not bad. In Electman's stage, you immediately see that Yoku blocks made their way into this game too. Delightful. Well, as long as you can see the emerging pattern before you have to jump, it's usually fine. Similarly to NES Electman's stage, you'll be climbing a tower for a large portion of the level, and if you get hit by any of the electrical obstacles, you will probably get knocked down to a lower screen. It's somewhat of an endurance test, although it was mostly done better than Capcom's first attempt. This game introduces fans as a new obstacle, which force you to keep moving and recalculate some of your jumps. These work surprisingly well. The Yoku block pattern at the end of the first climb does not work well and will likely result in you falling down a few screens. Notably, in any stage you pick, you'll see a lot of enemies return from the original Mega Man game. So there are a lot of references to that, but it's nice to see that a new game was made with all these elements. In fact, the simple enemies are effective on the Game Boy for the most part. The Mets return to their original form, and the Bladers arguably work even better in this game. I was not at all happy to see Big Eye return though. I wouldn't give Big Eye to my worst enemy, and in this game Big Eye is my worst enemy. It is completely random with no way to tell when it will move and how high it will jump. It always took approximately 214 shots to defeat, and here it was made even worse as it is only vulnerable when it jumps. So, some alterations were made with the returning enemies, and the Robot Masters act differently too. Electman may not have been the easiest boss to defeat with just the usual default weapon, the Mega Buster. Fortunately, most of the bosses functioned in a reasonable manner compared to their original forms, which required a PhD to understand. Electman reacts to Mega Man shooting if he's at a certain distance, which I was able to take advantage of and beat this fight. This is the kind of design that more recent games in the series were able to work out, and I like this design of identifying patterns or reactions to your actions. After beating bosses, you'll see a cutscene simply telling you the name of the weapon you earned, featuring an odd image of Mega Man split in half, revealing the robot inside. I don't have a lot to say about the other Robot Master stages, but I do have a few quick comments to make. Electricity is still Iceman's weakness, so his stage was up next, introducing ice blocks that quickly melt if you stand on them. With the other surfaces also being slippery, this stage didn't pair too well with this game's controls. There were some unnecessarily tight jumps, and one of the icicle sections was finickier than it needed to be, but it wasn't a bad stage altogether. Iceman himself seemed to be on easy mode, however, so I might recommend starting with this stage when playing for the first time. Unsurprisingly, Fireman was up next, with a tune that was pitched up way too high. I don't understand why so many old games wanted to have high pitches like this, especially if they didn't blend in well, and it's unnecessary even with the limited sounds. The stage itself is fine though. There's a lot of seemingly precise platforming, most of which is easier than it looks, and still satisfying. I often enjoyed the use of the enemies called screwdrivers too. I do think that the Chanky Makers take too many shots to defeat, and the waves of fire near the end were too tricky to time for a one-off challenge. Fireman is also an easy boss, although it's useful to have the Ice Slasher weapon during his stage, so I wouldn't start here. Only Cutman remains, and his new weakness is fire due to the omission of his former weakness. This stage was really hard, and I didn't care for the new enemies it introduced. Let me clarify that I'm not calling the difficulty a problem in this instance. I would shorten the stage, however, or at least add an earlier checkpoint. I enjoyed the conveyors used as an added layer of difficulty for the platforming, and Cutman's revamped battle was nice. These stages weren't quite up to the standard I expected with Mega Man, but I will agree that they are suitable for the Game Boy. Perhaps that isn't the best compliment though, and I might be running out of compliments to give this game now that we're on to Dr. Wily. What's his revenge all about anyway? He shows off his vengeful eyebrows, and Mega Man chases his flying saucer into his castle. Now it's time to discover that Dr. Wily's revenge is in fact diabolically evil. I didn't think the kooky doctor would get any real revenge, but I certainly felt like someone was getting revenge on me as I continued playing. The level design quality declines dramatically, which is typical for Wily's stages in the series. This is something else though. The initial stages aren't as good as I expected from Mega Man, so I needed the later stages to improve, or be at least as good as the first four. They weren't. A few aspects are fine, but the challenges that stick in my memory are the disasters. Big eyes are annoying enough on their own, they don't need to be in tighter spaces. Moles? They're not moles at all, they look like tiny screws, and they're annoying little screw-ups at that. They only hurt if you walk right into them, but the problem is they appear right in front of where Mega Man is facing. The way through is to inch your way forward when the coast is clear, or at least a couple of pixels are. Once was bad enough, but no, there's a second corridor of moles that lasts for so much longer, and the ceiling is barely above your head, so there's no chance for shortcuts. Oh, and in between all that is a fall down a few screens where you can't see the hazards below. My fault, I should have anticipated them all. When you finally reach the end, you'll be in Dr. Wily's teleport system, which can only mean it's time for a boss rush. The Robot Masters weren't too bad, and you've already seen them all before, so it should be fine. Except these are all different Robot Masters. 4 more returning from the NES series, this time from Mega Man 2. For me, this crosses a line for difficulty. At the end of a thoroughly unimpressive stage, you're asking me to fight 4 bosses consecutively while learning how they all work. There's one good thing here, and that's the ability to gain all of their weapons too. Beyond that, I've got more to rant about, because Flashman is the only one vulnerable to a weapon you've already had entering this point, and then you'll have to find a new weakness order for these Robot Masters. Putting Quickman into this boss rush is also beyond cruel. Congrats to Dr. Wily on his revenge, I guess. Traditionally, the boss rush would lead into the final boss, although with 4 new weapons to play with, that wouldn't make sense. The stage does end with yet another boss though, so that's now 5 new bosses to defeat in a row. This is Anchor, and he's not as hard as the others, but it's still a Mega Man game, so making a mistake will be punishing. Interestingly, you also obtain a weapon from him, despite not being a traditional Robot Master. With 5 new weapons, Mega Man now follows Dr. Wily into space for the true final stage. Happy music! That doesn't seem fitting at all, and the composition is pretty lame for series standards. The Space Castle is a compilation of various challenges you've seen already, often with ramped up difficulty. In general, it's not as bad as the previous stage, but again, the memorable challenges aren't the good ones. The falling sections are even worse, and the extended Yoku block section has a trap that you can't see before you get there. At least let me see the whole pattern before making me jump across the blocks. We also have way too many big eyes in a row, and hey, it's Wily! In reality, that's not the true sequence of events, and the stage is very long. It did feel like it transitioned into the final battle with Wily quickly though. Against all odds, Wily's fight seems like it's actually designed well. Since his new machine takes up so much space on a tiny screen, I expected this to be a disaster just like his castle stages. If you can fully charge 2 blasts of atomic fire, Heatman's weapon, you can even take out the first phase in just 2 hits. And if you were wondering, yes, they really did put Fireman and Heatman in the same game. I also like that the final phase can only be defeated by using the final weapon you collect, Anchor's Mirror Buster. You can hold the button to keep the mirror active the entire time so that it reflects Wily's bullets, and then just focus on dodging the claw attack. It still took me a few tries to complete the whole thing, but it made a positive impression because it was far more engaging than most of the endgame. Holy moly, or indeed holy moles. What do I do about this game? Mega Man gazes out into space at the end, and I sat there very confused. I really despised the end of the game, and I'm not going to give it extra points for making it feel like Wily got his revenge on me. Now, it's clear that there was some decent effort put into this game, and some people remember it fondly. With limited knowledge of how the Game Boy works, I can see that this was a genuinely nice attempt at bringing the series to the system. And you could say that Game Boy counterparts were never meant to be as good as their home console series. The game definitely wasn't bad at first, but for me, it never sparkled even considering the platform it's on. Therefore, my final score for Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge will be 5.9 out of 10. To call something not bad for the Game Boy really means it isn't a great game by any means. It's not a game I'm recommending to many people anytime soon. When Mega Man Legacy Collection was announced for the console series, the plan was to release an additional collection for the handheld series as well. It would stay portable with the Game Boy Advance, and the collection would be called Mega Man Mania. However, it was never released, so it has been difficult to play any of the Rockman World side series until now. No remakes were made, and it was only available on 3DS Virtual Console for a limited time in the 2010s. Now you can finally play the whole series with Nintendo Switch Online. Critics were largely happy to see Mega Man's new portable adventure, with Nintendo Power giving it the Game Boy Spotlight in their August 1991 issue. Their score totaled 16.2 out of 20, barely making the top score for the system that month. Electronic Gaming Monthly's review panel was even more excited. Almost every critic said that it was one of the only games that could get them to play the Game Boy for extended periods of time. Their average score was 8.5 out of 10 in the same month where they reviewed SNES launch titles. This game was equally as good as F-Zero according to them, and just short of Super Mario World. Nope, my view hasn't changed after that. Dr. Wily's Revenge simply doesn't compare to many other games in the series, or other successful Game Boy platformers. Tell me, did you agree with the points I've made? What rating would you give Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge for the Game Boy, initially released in 1991? Give your revenge back to Dr. Wily by hitting the like button and subscribe to keep him away. As ever, thank you for watching, and please continue to be your own unique self. Something in the water, something in the air, something in your underwear.
Underwear?
Under there! Dumbo.
Wait.
I'm sorry, that was toxic.